Welcome to Fireside Tales of Mystery. Tonight, we journey to the windswept moors of Devonshire, where autumn's dying light falls upon an ancient estate and older secrets still. The equinox approaches, that liminal moment when day and night stand in perfect, fleeting balance, and with it comes an invitation that Hercule Poirot cannot refuse. Join us for the Autumn Equinox Mystery, a tale of ritual, resentment, and revenge spanning generations, crafted in homage to the masterful Agatha Christie, whose genius we honor, though this enigma unfolds on our own terms. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you joining us from tonight? Your presence illuminates our journey through these shadowed mysteries. Now, let the story unfold. Chapter 1. The Invitation to Hollowmere. The letter arrived on the morning of September the 19th, 1934, carried by the second post and bearing a Devonshire postmark that had smudged slightly in transit. I, Captain Arthur Hastings, observed my friend Hercule Poirot as he slit the envelope with his customary precision, using the silver letter opener that always lay at a perfect right angle to his blotter. His rooms in Whitehaven Mansions were, as ever, a temple to order. The morning light fell through immaculate windows upon furniture arranged with geometric exactitude. Poirot himself sat in his accustomed chair, his egg-shaped head inclined slightly as he withdrew the letter within. "Hastings," he murmured, his green eyes scanning the page. "Do you know of Hollowmere Hall?" I searched my memory. "Devonshire, isn't it? Old family, the Ashworths. I believe I read something about them in Country Life some months ago. The current master is rather eccentric, if I recall. Fancies himself an expert on standing stones and druids and such." "Marcus Ashworth," Poirot confirmed, tapping the letter. "And it is he who writes to me now." He handed me the correspondence. The handwriting was bold, almost aggressive in its strokes, the pen having pressed deeply into expensive cream paper embossed with a family crest, a raven perched upon a standing stone. "Dear Monsieur Poirot, I write to you on a matter of some delicacy, and I fear increasing urgency. For 3 generations, my family has hosted the Equinox gathering at Hollowmere Hall, a celebration of the old ways, the turning of the season, and the balance between light and darkness. This year's gathering takes place on the 21st of September. I have reason to believe that someone among my guests intends to do me harm. The threats have been subtle. Objects moved, warnings left in curious places, a sense of being watched. My family dismisses my concerns as the fancies of an old man too consumed by ancient superstitions. But I know what I know, Monsieur Poirot. The equinox is a time of transition, and someone wishes to ensure that I do not survive this particular passage. I beg you to attend as my guest. Your reputation precedes you, and I believe that your presence alone may deter whatever malevolence awaits. I have enclosed train tickets for yourself and a companion. The 5:40 from Paddington will bring you to Moorbridge Station, where my car will collect you. I remain, in desperate hope, Marcus Ashworth." I looked up to find Poirot watching me with that peculiar intensity that meant his little gray cells were already at work. "What do you make of it, Hastings?" "Fellow sounds rather overwrought," I admitted. "Objects moved, warnings in curious places, could be servants playing tricks, or his imagination running wild. You said yourself he's obsessed with pagan rituals and whatnot. Perhaps he's conjured threats where none exist." "Perhaps." Poirot's fingers steepled beneath his chin. "And yet, the letter itself tells a different story. Observe the handwriting, mon ami. Bold, decisive. This is not the script of a man given to nervous fancies. And here, he pointed to a passage. He speaks of his family dismissing his concerns. A man inventing threats would not mention that others disbelieve him. No, Marcus Ashworth is frightened, and he is not a man who frightens easily. So we're going? We are going. Poirot rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the gray London morning. The autumn equinox, a time of balance, the old ones believed. The veil between worlds grows thin. He turned back to me with a slight smile. I do not believe in such superstitions, Hastings, but I believe in the darkness that dwells within the human heart. And that darkness, it requires no supernatural assistance. The 5:40 from Paddington departed precisely on schedule, much to Poirot's satisfaction. He settled into our first-class compartment with a contented sigh, arranging his traveling case with meticulous care before withdrawing a slim folder. "I have made inquiries," he announced, as the London suburbs began to give way to open countryside. "The Ashworth family is most interesting." "You've had less than 6 hours since the letter arrived," I protested. "And in those 6 hours, the little gray cells have not been idle." He opened the folder. Marcus Ashworth, aged 63, inherited Hollowmere Hall upon his father's death in 1912. He never married, devoting himself instead to the study of ancient British ritual sites. The standing stones on the Hollowmere estate are his particular obsession, a circle of 12 stones dating, he claims, to the Bronze Age. Sounds like a lonely sort of existence. Lonely, perhaps, but not solitary. His household includes his younger sister, Violet Ashworth, aged 58, who has served as his hostess and housekeeper for many years. There is also his nephew, Hugh Ashworth, the son of a deceased brother, who is, I understand, something of a disappointment to the family. In what way? Poirot's mustache twitched. Debts, Hastings, considerable debts. Young Monsieur Hugh has a fondness for horses that do not win and cards that do not favor him. As the sole heir to Hollowmere, he has been living on expectations that his uncle shows no sign of fulfilling by dying. That gives him a motive, I said slowly. It gives him the most obvious motive, Poirot agreed, which is precisely why we must not allow ourselves to be blinded by it. Who else attends this gathering? He consulted his notes. The Equinox gathering traditionally includes the local gentry. This year's guests comprise Sir Edmund and Lady Hartwell of Moorbridge Manor, old family friends, Dr. Leonard Price, the village physician who has attended Marcus Ashworth for many years, Miss Celia Blackwood, a young woman who serves as Ashworth's research assistant and secretary, and finally, Mr. Oliver Marsh, an antiquarian from London who shares Ashworth's interest in standing stones. Quite a collection. Indeed, and among them, if Marcus Ashworth is correct, lurks one who wishes him dead. Poirot gazed out at the darkening countryside. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson. The equinox, Hastings. In 2 days, day and night will stand in perfect balance, and then the darkness will begin its ascent. Moorbridge Station was little more than a platform and a small stone building, but a motor car awaited us as promised. A handsome Bentley driven by a taciturn man in chauffeur's livery, who introduced himself simply as Jennings. The drive to Hollowmere took us across moorland that seemed to stretch endlessly beneath the emerging stars. The road wound between outcroppings of granite and patches of dying heather, the last light of day revealing a landscape both beautiful and desolate. There, sir." Jennings spoke for the first time in 20 minutes, nodding toward a rise ahead. Hollowmere Hall. The house emerged from the darkness like something from a Gothic romance. Built of gray stone that seemed to absorb what little light remained, it sprawled across the hilltop in a confusion of gables, chimneys, and mullioned windows. Ivy covered the eastern wing entirely, and somewhere within, lights flickered behind glass that had witnessed 3 centuries of Ashworth history. "Magnificent," I murmured. "Isolated," Poirot observed. "If something were to happen here, Hastings, help would be a long time coming." We were met at the door by a butler of considerable age and dignity, who introduced himself as Fenton. His face betrayed nothing as he welcomed us, but I noticed his eyes, sharp and watchful, examining Poirot with keen interest. "Mr. Ashworth is expecting you, Monsieur Poirot. He asked that you be shown directly to the library upon your arrival. Captain Hastings, I will have your bags taken to your room." The library was a vast, high-ceilinged chamber lined with books that climbed toward shadows the firelight could not reach. Display cases held artifacts I could not identify, fragments of pottery, bronze implements, curious stones carved with spiraling patterns. Above the fireplace hung a large oil painting of the standing stones themselves, rendered in moonlight, the ancient circle somehow menacing in its stillness. Marcus Ashworth rose from a leather chair as we entered. He was a tall man, gaunt, with a scholar's stoop and eyes that burned with fierce intelligence. His hair was silver white, swept back from a high forehead, and his hands, I noticed immediately, trembled slightly as he extended them in greeting. "Monsieur Poirot, thank God you've come." "Monsieur Ashworth." Poirot accepted the handshake with his customary precision. "Allow me to introduce my friend and colleague, Captain Hastings." "Captain?" Ashworth nodded absently, his attention fixed on Poirot. "You received my letter. You understand the urgency. I understand that you believe yourself to be in danger. What I do not yet understand is why." Ashworth moved to a side table and poured 3 glasses of brandy with hands that shook visibly. "The warnings began 6 weeks ago. Small things at first. A book moved from its usual place. A door I knew I had locked found open. I might have dismissed them as the lapses of an aging mind, but then I found this." He withdrew a folded paper from his jacket pocket and handed it to Poirot. It was a page torn from a book, an old book by the yellowed quality of the paper, bearing an illustration of a robed figure lying across a stone altar. Above the figure, another robed form raised a curved blade. Beneath the illustration, someone had written in red ink, "The balance must be restored." "The illustration is from Fraser's work on sacrifice," Ashworth said, his voice strained. "But those words, someone in this house wrote them, someone who means to ensure I do not survive the equinox." Poirot examined the paper with care, holding it to the lamplight, turning it to observe the handwriting from various angles. "Where did you find this, monsieur?" "On my pillow, 3 weeks ago. I had locked my bedroom door before retiring. I am certain of it. Yet in the morning, there it was." "And you suspect someone within your household?" Ashworth's face contorted with something between anger and anguish. "Who else could it be? Fenton has keys to every room, but he has served my family for 40 years. My sister Violet thinks I have lost my reason entirely. My nephew, Hugh—" He stopped, pressing his lips together. "Your nephew stands to inherit," Poirot said quietly. "Yes, and he has reason to wish me dead sooner rather than later. His creditors grow impatient." Ashworth drained his brandy. "But Hugh is too obvious, Monsieur Poirot. That is what troubles me most. Whoever is behind this is clever, clever enough to make their warnings subtle, clever enough to enter locked rooms without trace. Hugh has many flaws, but subtlety is not among them. And your other guests? The Hartwells are old friends. I cannot believe they would wish me harm. Dr. Price has been my physician for 20 years. Oliver Marsh is a colleague, a fellow scholar, and Celia, Miss Blackwood." His expression softened. "She has been invaluable to my research, a brilliant young woman. I cannot imagine her capable of violence." Poirot set down his untouched brandy. "Nevertheless, monsieur, someone has threatened you, and that someone is likely within these walls. You will introduce me to your guests as simply an old acquaintance, non? It will be better if my true purpose remains concealed." "Whatever you think best." Ashworth's relief was palpable. "The others arrive tomorrow morning. The gathering begins tomorrow evening, with dinner in the great hall, and on the night of the equinox itself." He hesitated. "Yes? We hold the ceremony at the Standing Stones, at midnight, when the balance tips. It is a tradition that has continued unbroken for 3 generations." His eyes met Poirot's. "If something is going to happen, Monsieur Poirot, it will happen then." Chapter 2. The Gathering Storm. I slept poorly that first night at Hollowmere Hall. The wind moaned ceaselessly across the moors, rattling the casements of my bedroom with persistent, ghostly fingers. When I did drift into uneasy slumber, my dreams were troubled by images of standing stones that seemed to move in the darkness, circling ever closer. Poirot, by contrast, appeared at breakfast immaculately groomed and distressingly alert. He had already been awake for some hours, he informed me, having used the early morning to explore the house and its grounds. "And what did you discover?" I asked, attacking a plate of eggs and kidneys with rather less enthusiasm than usual. "Many things of interest, Hastings." He sipped his coffee. He had politely declined the tea service, with evident satisfaction. "The house itself is a labyrinth. 3 separate staircases connect the floors, and there exist at least 2 passages between walls that are not immediately apparent. A person who knew the house well could move about with considerable freedom." "Servants' passages?" "In part, but also older routes, priest holes, and hidden ways dating to less tolerant times." His mustache twitched. "Any member of this household could have accessed Monsieur Ashworth's bedroom without using the main corridor." Before I could respond, the door opened to admit a woman of late middle age, her gray hair pulled back, severely from a face that might once have been handsome, but had settled into lines of permanent disapproval. She wore black, not mourning precisely, but something close to it, and her eyes swept over us with cool assessment. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings." Her voice matched her appearance, clipped, efficient, unwelcoming. "I am Violet Ashworth. My brother mentioned you had arrived." "Mademoiselle Ashworth." Poirot rose and executed a small bow. "Your brother has spoken of you with great affection." Something flickered in her eyes, surprise, perhaps, or skepticism. "Has he indeed? That is gratifying." She moved to the sideboard and poured herself tea with movements of rigid precision. "I hope Marcus did not fill your heads with his nonsense about threats and warnings. My brother has become increasingly fanciful in recent years. His obsession with those wretched stones has quite unbalanced him. You do not share his interests in antiquarian matters?" "I do not share his conviction that the ancient Britons possessed mystical wisdom that we moderns have lost." She sat at the far end of the table, her cup held like a shield before her. Marcus sees portents and omens where there are none. A misplaced book becomes a supernatural warning. A page from one of his own volumes becomes a death threat. You believe he wrote the warning himself? Violet's cup paused halfway to her lips. I did not say that, Monsieur Poirot. No, but you implied it, did you not? Poirot's voice remained gentle, but his eyes were sharp. Tell me, mademoiselle, when did your brother's fancies begin? She set down her cup with deliberate care. 6 months ago, perhaps 7, around the time Miss Blackwood joined the household. Her lips pressed thin. Make of that what you will. The other guests began arriving late in the morning. I stationed myself in the entrance hall, ostensibly reading a newspaper, but in truth observing the new arrivals with keen attention. Sir Edmund and Lady Hartwell were the first to appear, a portly, red-faced gentleman of 60-odd years, and his wife, a faded blonde whose nervous laugh punctuated every sentence. They greeted Ashworth with the easy familiarity of old friendship, though I noticed Lady Hartwell's eyes darting constantly about the hall as if searching for something or someone. Dreadful business about the harvest, Sir Edmund was saying as I approached. Half the county's wheat still in the fields. If this weather doesn't break, who's this? Ashworth made introductions. Sir Edmund pumped my hand with vigor. Lady Hartwell offered fingers that trembled slightly in my grasp. Military man, are you? Excellent, excellent. Always good to have steady chaps about when one's in the country. Never know what might happen, eh? He laughed heartily at his own observation. Dr. Leonard Price arrived next, driving himself in a battered Morris that had seen better decades. He was a small, neat man with silver-rimmed spectacles and the distracted air of one whose thoughts perpetually dwelt elsewhere. His medical bag never left his hand, I noticed. Even when greeting his host, he clutched its worn leather handle as though it were a talisman. "Marcus, you look tired," he said, peering at Ashworth with professional concern. "Have you been sleeping?" "Well enough, Leonard, well enough. The tonic I prescribed, you have been taking it?" "Religiously." Ashworth's smile held an edge, though I wonder sometimes if it does more harm than good. Dr. Price's expression flickered, a momentary tightening around the eyes, before settling back into bland concern. "We shall discuss your regimen later. The equinox always unsettles you. It will pass." The antiquarian, Oliver Marsh, arrived in a hired car from the station, burdened with cases of books and papers that required the assistance of both Fenton and Jennings to transport. He was younger than I had expected, perhaps 40, with dark hair silvering at the temples and an intensity of manner that reminded me uncomfortably of Ashworth himself. "The alignment of the stones," he was saying before he had even properly entered the house. "I've completed the calculations. The moon will rise directly through the eastern trilithon at 11:47. If my theory is correct—" "Oliver, please." Ashworth held up a hand. "We have guests who are not interested in archaeoastronomy. May I present—" But Marsh had already fixed his attention upon Poirot, and something curious passed across his features. Recognition, perhaps, quickly suppressed. "Monsieur Hercule Poirot," he said slowly. "The detective." A brief silence fell. Ashworth's face betrayed nothing, but I saw his sister's eyes narrow. "You are mistaken, monsieur," Poirot said smoothly. "I am merely a retired gentleman with an interest in— I attended your lecture at the Royal Society 3 years ago." Marcia's smile held no warmth. The psychology of criminal investigation. Fascinating material. One does not forget such things. He turned to Ashworth. You've brought in a detective, Marcus. How prudent. The atmosphere in the entrance hall had shifted palpably. Lady Hartwell's nervous laugh broke the tension. A detective? How thrilling. Just like one of those novels. Do say there hasn't been a murder, Mr. Ashworth. I simply couldn't bear it. There has been no murder, Ashworth said heavily. Monsieur Poirot is here as my guest, nothing more. But the damage was done. I saw it in the sidelong glances, the subtle repositioning of bodies. Whatever advantage anonymity might have provided was lost. From this moment forward, everyone in Hollowmere Hall would know they were being watched. Miss Celia Blackwood did not arrive. She had been in residence for several months, occupying a small suite in the East Wing where she worked on cataloging Ashworth's research. Poirot and I encountered her in the library that afternoon, surrounded by papers and leather-bound volumes. She was younger than I had expected, perhaps 25, with dark hair pinned sensibly back and intelligent gray eyes that assessed us quickly before returning to her work. Her dress was plain but well made, her manner professional without being cold. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings. She did not rise. Mr. Ashworth mentioned you would be joining us. Forgive me for not standing. I'm in the middle of cross-referencing the Pemberton manuscript with Aubrey's notes, and if I lose my place... Please, do not disturb yourself, mademoiselle. Poirot settled into a chair opposite her, his eyes roaming over the stacked documents. Your work here, it is demanding, fascinating, rather. For the first time, animation entered her voice. Mr. Ashworth's theories about the astronomical alignments of British stone circles are quite revolutionary. If we can demonstrate a consistent pattern across multiple sites, you share his passion for the ancient mysteries. I share his commitment to rigorous scholarship. Her chin lifted slightly. There is a difference, monsieur. Mr. Ashworth sometimes allows his enthusiasm to outpace his evidence. It is my task to ensure his conclusions are properly supported. A difficult position, Poirot observed, to correct one's employer. He values honesty. It is one of his finest qualities. Her eyes met Poirot's directly. I understand you are here because he believes himself threatened. I hope you will not encourage his anxieties unnecessarily. Marcus, Mr. Ashworth, has not been himself lately. The equinox always affects him strangely, and this year has been particularly difficult. In what way, mademoiselle? She hesitated, her pen hovering over her notes. He has become suspicious, secretive. He locks his study at night now, which he never did before, and he has been revising his will. I know this because he asked me to witness his signature last month. His will? I interjected. Did he mention what changes he was making? That would hardly be appropriate to discuss, Captain. Her tone cooled noticeably. I merely witnessed the document. Its contents are none of my concern. Poirot leaned forward, his voice gentle. Miss Blackwood, I must ask, the threatening note that Monsieur Ashworth received, the page torn from Fraser's work. You are familiar with every book in this library, non? I am. Then you would know if such a book existed within this collection, and if a page had been torn from it. Her face remained composed, but I saw her fingers tighten on her pen. The golden bough is indeed in Mr. Ashworth's collection, third shelf from the window, between Lang and Murray. I examined it after he showed me the threatening page. She paused. No pages were missing. Ah. Poirot sat back, his eyebrows rising. Then the page came from elsewhere. Most interesting. Or, Miss Blackwood said quietly, the threat was fabricated from materials obtained outside this house, which would suggest either an external source or an internal one who was clever enough to cover their tracks. Her gray eyes met Poirot's, and something passed between them. A recognition, perhaps, of matched intellects. Then she returned to her manuscript, and we were dismissed. The Equinox dinner that evening was a tense affair. The great hall of Hollowmere had been prepared with evident care. Candles flickered in ancient sconces, casting dancing shadows across tapestried walls, and a fire roared in the massive stone fireplace. The long table was laid with crystal and silver that gleamed in the wavering light. Marcus Ashworth presided at the head of the table, his sister at the foot. The guests arranged themselves between Sir Edmund and Lady Hartwell on one side, with Oliver Marsh, Dr. Price, Miss Blackwood, and Poirot on the other. I found myself seated beside Lady Hartwell, whose nervous chatter proved both exhausting and illuminating. "Such a shame about young Hugh," she confided in an undertone as the first course was served. "He was meant to arrive this afternoon, you know, but sent a telegram saying he'd been delayed. Business in London, he claims, though I suspect it's creditors rather than clients." She laughed, then caught herself. "Oh dear, I shouldn't have said that. Edmund always says I talk too much." "Hugh Ashworth is expected, then?" "Tomorrow morning, supposedly. Though between you and me, Captain, I wonder if he'll come at all. He and his uncle had the most frightful row last month. I happened to overhear when we were visiting. Something about the estate and Hugh's expectations. Marcus was absolutely livid." Across the table, I noticed Poirot deep in conversation with Dr. Price. The doctor's hands, I observed, were never still, adjusting his spectacles, straightening his cutlery, touching his napkin. The nervous habits of a guilty man, I wondered, or merely the mannerisms of a physician accustomed to restless work. Oliver Marsh had engaged Miss Blackwood in a discussion of lunar alignments that seemed designed more to impress than to inform. She listened politely, occasionally correcting a detail, her expression betraying nothing of her private thoughts. And at the head of the table, Marcus Ashworth ate little and drank less, his eyes moving constantly between his guests, watching, waiting. At 10 o'clock, he rose and tapped his glass. "Friends, the hour approaches. In ancient times, our ancestors gathered at the standing stones to mark the turning of the seasons, to honor the balance between light and dark, summer and winter, life and death." His voice carried the resonance of ritual, words spoken many times before. Tonight, we continue that tradition. Those who wish to join me at the stones are welcome. Those who prefer to retire may do so. "I should very much like to see these famous stones," Poirot said, "if Monsieur permits." "Of course." Ashworth's smile was thin. "The more witnesses, the better." We gathered cloaks and coats against the chill autumn night. The moon, nearly full, hung low on the horizon, casting silver light across the moorland as we followed the path from the hall toward the distant circle. The standing stones emerged from the darkness like sentinels, 12 massive pillars of granite arranged in a perfect circle, with a larger stone at the center that Ashworth called the altar. In the moonlight, they seemed almost alive, their shadows stretching toward us like grasping fingers. Ashworth moved to the altar stone and produced a silver chalice from beneath his cloak. "The ceremonial cup," he announced, "passed down through 5 generations of Ashworths. On the equinox night, we drink to the balance, to the turning of the wheel." He poured wine from a flask into the chalice, raised it to the moon, and drank. Then he passed it to his sister. I watched, fascinated despite myself, as the cup made its circuit, Violet to Sir Edmund, to Lady Hartwell, to Dr. Price, to Miss Blackwood, to Oliver Marsh. Each drank and passed it on. When it reached Poirot, he raised it to his lips, but, I noticed, did not actually swallow. His eyes met mine briefly as he handed the cup to me. I followed his example, letting the wine touch my lips without drinking. The ceremony continued for another hour, Ashworth intoning words in what he claimed was reconstructed Brythonic, the guests standing in uncomfortable silence. When at last it concluded, we returned to the hall in a ragged procession, the cold having sapped whatever enthusiasm the ritual had inspired. "Tomorrow night," Ashworth announced as we gathered in the entrance hall. "The true equinox, the moment of perfect balance. I trust you will all join me once more." We retired to our rooms. The fire in my grate had burned low, and the wind seemed to have intensified, howling across the moors with renewed fury. I undressed quickly and climbed into bed, exhausted. But sleep would not come. Something about the evening nagged at me, some detail I had observed but not consciously registered. The ceremonial cup passing from hand to hand, the wine that gleamed dark as blood in the moonlight, and Ashworth's words, spoken almost casually. The more witnesses, the better. Witnesses to what, I wondered, as the wind screamed outside my window. Witnesses to what? Chapter 3. Death at the Standing Stones. I was awakened by a scream. It pierced the gray half-light of dawn, cutting through the howl of wind that had accompanied my restless dreams. For a moment I lay frozen, uncertain whether the sound had been real or merely the echo of nightmare. Then it came again, a woman's voice, raw with terror, and I was on my feet, fumbling for my dressing gown. The corridor was already alive with confusion. Doors opened along its length, disgorging guests in various states of undress. Sir Edmund emerged in a nightshirt that strained across his considerable belly. Lady Hartwell clutched a wrapper about her shoulders, her face pale as milk. Dr. Price was fully dressed. Had the man slept at all? His medical bag clutched in his perpetual grip. "What the devil?" Sir Edmund began. "The stones." It was a maid, young and wild-eyed, who came stumbling up the main staircase. "At the stones, sir. Mr. Ashworth. Oh God, Mr. Ashworth." Poirot appeared at my elbow, immaculately groomed despite the hour. His green eyes were sharp, alert, already assessing. "Come, Hastings," he said quietly. "I fear the worst has arrived." We descended the stairs and followed the maid through the servants' entrance, out into the chill morning. Mist lay heavy upon the moors, obscuring the landscape in shifting veils of gray. The standing stones were invisible from the house, but the path was clear enough, worn by centuries of feet. I heard Violet Ashworth behind us, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Miss Blackwood followed, her face composed but bloodless. Oliver Marsh brought up the rear, his expression unreadable. The stones emerged from the mist like ghosts materializing from the spirit world. 12 granite pillars, their surfaces slick with condensation, surrounded the central altar stone. And upon that altar, I stopped. My stomach lurched. Marcus Ashworth lay spread across the ancient stone, his arms extended, his eyes staring sightlessly at the iron sky. He wore the ceremonial robes from the previous evening's ritual, white linen now stained crimson, where blood had pooled beneath his body. His face was contorted in an expression of agony, frozen at the moment of death. But it was not the blood that arrested my attention. It was the silver chalice still clutched in his rigid fingers, and the dark residue that stained his lips. Mon Dieu, Poirot breathed. Dr. Price pushed past us, his professional instincts overriding shock. He pressed fingers to Ashworth's neck, though we all knew the gesture was futile. The body had the waxy pallor of death several hours established. He's gone, Price confirmed unnecessarily. Dead for, I would estimate, 4 to 5 hours. The rigor is well advanced. That would place death between 2 and 3 in the morning, Poirot said, after we had all retired, but before dawn. Violet Ashworth made a sound, not quite a sob, not quite a gasp, and sat heavily upon one of the smaller stones. Her face had gone gray, but her eyes remained dry. He knew, she whispered. He knew someone wanted him dead, and still he came out here alone. The stubborn, foolish old man. He came alone? Poirot's voice sharpened. You are certain of this, mademoiselle? How would I know? I was asleep in my bed, as any sensible person would be at such an hour. Her composure cracked slightly. But Marcus often came to the stones at night. He believed the veil between worlds was thinnest in the hours before dawn. Superstitious nonsense. Miss Blackwood had moved closer to the body, her analytical gaze sweeping over the scene. The ceremonial cup, she said. He drank from it again, but we finished the wine last evening. I saw him empty the flask. Then someone refilled it. Sir Edmund had arrived, puffing from exertion, his face mottled red and white. Someone lured him out here and poisoned him. It's obvious, isn't it? The nephew. Where's that nephew of his? Hugh Ashworth has not yet arrived, Poirot said. His telegram indicated he would come this morning. Convenient, that. Sir Edmund's mustache bristled. Very convenient indeed. The boy's in debt up to his eyebrows. Everyone knows it. And now he inherits everything. We must not jump to the conclusions, Poirot said mildly. Dr. Price, what can you tell us of the manner of death? The blood... Price had been examining the body more closely, his lined face troubled. The blood is curious. There's a wound to the chest. Here, you can see where the robe is torn. But it's superficial, not deep enough to cause death. He lifted one of Ashworth's hands, examining the fingers. And these stains around the mouth, the residue in the cup. I would say poison is the more likely cause. The wound may have been inflicted post-mortem. After death, I exclaimed. But why? To make it appear as ritual sacrifice, perhaps. Poirot's gaze was fixed on the body, his gray cells visibly at work. Observe the positioning, Hastings. The arms extended, the body centered upon the altar stone. This is not how a man falls who has been poisoned. This is arrangement. Theater. Someone wanted it to look like the old rites, Oliver Marsh said quietly. He had been standing apart, his dark eyes moving between the body and the stones. A sacrifice to mark the equinox, the balance restored through blood. He caught our stares and shrugged. It's consistent with certain interpretations of Bronze Age practice. Ashworth himself wrote extensively on ritual killing. You seem remarkably well informed, Monsieur Marsh. I am an antiquarian, Monsieur Poirot. Death rituals are my specialty. His smile held no warmth. That does not make me a murderer. Poirot turned away from the body, his attention now on the ground surrounding the altar. The grass was wet with dew, and I could see what had caught his interest: footprints, multiple sets, overlapping and confused. "The ground, it has been much disturbed," he observed. "Many feet have walked here." "We all walked here last night," Lady Hartwell pointed out. She had arrived at last, supported by her husband, and her voice trembled with barely suppressed hysteria. "For the ceremony, our footprints would be everywhere." Indeed, and the rain that threatened did not fall. The ground remained soft enough to hold impressions. Poirot knelt, heedless of his immaculate trousers, and examined a particular set of prints. "These are fresh, made after the dew began to form. Someone came here in the early hours, someone wearing—" He paused, tilting his head. "Boots, heavy boots with a distinctive heel." "We should send for the police," Dr. Price said. "Constable Harding in the village?" "The telephone lines are down." It was Fenton, the butler, who spoke. He had followed us from the house and now stood at the edge of the circle, his ancient face impassive. "The storm in the night brought down the lines. Jennings has taken the car to Moorbridge, but the roads are poor. It may be several hours before assistance arrives." "Then we are isolated," Poirot said, "trapped together with a murderer among us." His gaze swept across the assembled company. "I suggest we return to the house. The body must not be disturbed until the police arrive, but we can accomplish much through conversation. Someone here knows what happened, and Hercule Poirot, he intends to discover the truth." We gathered in the library, that same room where Ashworth had first confided his fears. The irony was not lost on any of us. The books he had loved surrounded us like silent witnesses. The display cases of ancient artifacts seemed to reproach our failure to protect their master. Poirot had asked Fenton to ensure that no one left the house and to account for all members of staff. The servants were confined to the kitchen, their statements to be taken later. For now, his attention was fixed upon the guests and the household members who had slept beneath this roof while murder was done. "Let us establish the facts," Poirot began, standing before the fireplace with his hands clasped behind his back. "Last evening, we participated in the Equinox ceremony at the Standing Stones. The ritual concluded at approximately 11 o'clock, and we returned to the house. What happened then?" "We retired to our rooms," Sir Edmund said. "I escorted my wife upstairs and went directly to bed." "And you, Lady Hartwell? You did the same?" Yes. That is, I stopped briefly in the drawing room to take a glass of brandy. My nerves were quite unsettled. Then I went up." "Did you see anyone else during this time?" Lady Hartwell's eyes flickered. No, I don't believe so." Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly, but he did not press the point. "Dr. Price?" "I looked in on Ashworth before retiring. A professional habit. He seemed tired, but otherwise, well. He said he intended to review some notes in his study before sleeping." "What time was this?" "Perhaps 11:15, 11:20 at the latest." "And you observed nothing unusual? His manner, his speech, there was nothing to suggest he intended to return to the stones?" Price shook his head. "Nothing. He seemed resigned, almost, as if a weight had been lifted." "Curious." Poirot turned to Violet Ashworth, who sat rigid in a straight-backed chair, her hands folded in her lap. "Mademoiselle, you retired when?" "Immediately after the ceremony. I do not share my brother's enthusiasm for pagan theatrics. I went to my room and remained there until the maids screaming woke me." "You heard nothing during the night? No footsteps, no doors opening or closing?" The wind was very loud. It would have masked any ordinary sounds. And you, Miss Blackwood? Celia Blackwood met Poirot's gaze steadily. I stayed in the library for perhaps an hour after the others retired. I wanted to finish my work on the Pemberton manuscript. I heard Mr. Ashworth moving about in his study. The door was closed, but I could hear papers rustling, drawers opening and closing. Then, around midnight, I heard him leave. The room went very still. "Leave, mademoiselle. You heard him leave the house?" I heard footsteps in the corridor, and then the side door, the one that leads toward the moors, opening and closing. I assumed he was going to the stones. He often did so at night. "And you did nothing, said nothing?" Her composure cracked slightly. What was I to do? I am his secretary, not his keeper. Marcus was a grown man with his own rituals and obsessions. I had no right to interfere. Even knowing he believed his life to be in danger? Miss Blackwood's hands tightened in her lap. I thought his fears were exaggerated. Everyone did. Her voice dropped. I was wrong. Poirot nodded slowly. "And Monsieur Marsh? Where were you during these hours?" Oliver Marsh had been standing by the window, gazing out at the mist-shrouded moors. He turned now, his expression guarded. "In my room. I was reviewing calculations for tonight's observation, the lunar alignment through the eastern trilithon. I worked until perhaps 1 o'clock, then slept." "Did you hear Monsieur Ashworth leave the house?" "No. My room is in the west wing, on the opposite side from the study." "And did anyone see you during this time? Anyone who could confirm your presence?" Marsh's jaw tightened. "I was alone, Monsieur Poirot, as I suspect we all were." Poirot was silent for a long moment, his green eyes moving from face to face. Then he spoke, his voice soft, but carrying clearly in the hushed room. "There is one person who has not yet been accounted for, Hugh Ashworth, the nephew who was to arrive this morning. His absence is notable." "He sent a telegram," Violet said sharply. "He was delayed in London." "So he claimed, and yet, I wonder." Poirot moved to the window, his back to the room. The threatening note spoke of balance being restored. The equinox is a time of balance. And last night, at the Standing Stones, that balance was achieved, through blood. He turned back to face us. Someone here knew Marcus Ashworth would return to the stones alone. Someone refilled the ceremonial cup with poisoned wine. Someone arranged his body upon the altar in a grotesque parody of ancient sacrifice. His voice hardened. Someone in this room is a murderer, and before the police arrive, Hercule Poirot will know who. The silence that followed was absolute. The fire crackled, the wind moaned, and somewhere in the house a clock struck 9. The investigation had begun. Chapter 4. Shadows and Secrets. Poirot wasted no time in commencing his interrogations. He commandeered the late Marcus Ashworth's study, a small oak-paneled room adjoining the library, and requested that each member of the household present themselves in turn. I was permitted to remain as his silent observer, a role I had played many times before. The study itself was revealing. Books lined every wall, their spines worn with frequent handling. Papers covered the desk in seemingly chaotic profusion, though I suspected Ashworth had possessed his own peculiar system of organization. A half-empty glass of amber liquid sat beside the blotter, brandy by the smell of it, and an ashtray held the cold remains of a single cigarette. "He was here," Poirot murmured, examining the desk without touching anything. "Working, thinking, and then he left, knowing perhaps that death awaited him. He lifted a sheet of paper, holding it to the gray light from the window. "A letter, Hastings, unfinished." I moved closer to read over his shoulder. The handwriting was Ashworth's, bold and decisive, as I had observed before, but the words trailed off mid-sentence. "My dear Hugh, I have given considerable thought to our conversation of last month, and I find that I can no longer—" "Can no longer what?" I wondered aloud. "That, mon ami, is what we must discover." Poirot set down the letter carefully. "But first, let us hear what the household has to tell us. Send in Mademoiselle Ashworth, if you please." Violet Ashworth entered the study with the bearing of a woman accustomed to command. She seated herself in the chair Poirot indicated, her back ramrod straight, her hands folded with deliberate calm. "I presume you wish to interrogate me, Monsieur Poirot." "Interrogate is a harsh word, mademoiselle. I wish only to understand. You and your brother, you were close." Something flickered in her gray eyes. "We lived under the same roof for 40 years. Whether that constitutes closeness, I leave you to judge. You managed the household for him." "Someone had to. Marcus was hopeless with practical matters. His mind dwelt always among his precious stones and ancient rituals. The mundane business of running an estate held no interest for him." "And this arrangement, it satisfied you?" Violet's lips thinned. "Satisfaction is a luxury, monsieur. One does one's duty." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Tell me of your brother's will. Miss Blackwood mentioned that he revised it recently." "Did she indeed?" The words were cold. "Yes, Marcus changed his will approximately 6 weeks ago. He did not discuss the specifics with me." "But you knew of the changes?" "I knew something had changed. His manner toward certain members of the household altered." "Toward whom, mademoiselle?" Violet's composure cracked just slightly. "Toward that woman, Miss Blackwood. He began treating her less as a secretary and more as a confidant. They would spend hours closeted together in the library, and he would not tell me what they discussed." "You suspected a romantic attachment?" "I suspected manipulation." Her voice sharpened. "Celia Blackwood is young, clever, and ambitious. My brother was elderly, wealthy, and lonely. Draw your own conclusions, monsieur." "You believe she influenced the changes to his will?" "I believe she positioned herself to benefit from them. Whether she succeeded, we shall discover when the solicitor reads the document." Poirot was silent for a moment, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "One more question, mademoiselle. The threatening note your brother received, the page from Fraser's work. You told me you believed he might have written it himself." "I said no such thing." "Your implication was clear. But consider, if the page did not come from the Hollowmere library, as Miss Blackwood confirmed, then someone must have brought it from outside, someone with access to another copy of the book." Violet's face went very still. "What are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting, mademoiselle, that this crime was planned with considerable care. The threatening note, the ceremonial cup, the staging of the body. These are not the actions of a man fabricating threats against himself. These are the actions of a murderer who wished to create atmosphere." "Then find the murderer, Monsieur Poirot. That is what my brother summoned you to do." She rose abruptly. "If there is nothing else, I have a household to manage. Death does not excuse the servants from their duties." She departed without waiting for dismissal. Poirot watched her go, his expression thoughtful. A formidable woman, Hastings. You suspect her? I suspect everyone, mon ami. That is my method. But Mademoiselle Violette, she is hiding something. The question is whether it relates to murder or merely to wounded pride. Dr. Leonard Price entered the study with his medical bag still clutched in his hand. He sat uneasily in the chair, his eyes darting about the room as if cataloging its contents. "A terrible business," he said, unprompted. "Terrible. I've been Marcus's physician for 20 years. To see him like that upon those stones—" "You were perhaps closer to him than most, Doctor. Tell me of his health in recent months." Price adjusted his spectacles, a nervous habit I had observed before. His health was declining. Nothing specific, you understand. Simply the gradual deterioration that accompanies advancing age. He suffered from insomnia, occasional digestive complaints, episodes of confusion. Confusion? Minor lapses, forgetting where he had placed things, believing doors were locked when they were not. Price paused. I prescribed a tonic, a mild sedative to help him sleep. It seemed to provide some relief. This tonic, what did it contain? Bromide, primarily. A standard formulation. Nothing dangerous in normal doses. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And in abnormal doses? Price's hands tightened on his bag. Any medication can be dangerous if misused, Monsieur Poirot. But I carefully regulated Marcus's dosage. He received precisely what he needed. Nothing more. Who else had access to this tonic? Price stopped, visibly collecting himself. The bottle was kept in Marcus's bedroom, on his nightstand. Anyone with access to his room could have obtained it, I suppose. And the symptoms of bromide poisoning, what would they be? Confusion, drowsiness, in extreme cases, respiratory depression. Price's face had gone gray. Surely you cannot think I would harm him. Marcus was my patient, my friend. I think only what the evidence tells me, Doctor. Poirot's voice was gentle but implacable. One more question. Last night when you looked in on Monsieur Ashworth before retiring, you say he seemed well. Yet, Dr. Price, you also say his health was declining, that he suffered confusion and digestive complaints. Which is the truth? Price removed his spectacles and polished them with trembling hands. Both can be true, monsieur. Last night, Marcus seemed more himself than he had in weeks. Alert, focused, almost peaceful, as if he had resolved some internal conflict. He replaced his spectacles. Now, I wonder if he knew what was coming, if he had somehow made peace with it. Or, Poirot said quietly, if he believed the threat had passed, if someone had led him to believe he was safe. Price had no answer to that. Oliver Marsh proved a more challenging subject. He entered the study with an air of barely concealed impatience, settling into the chair with the casual grace of a man accustomed to controlling his environment. "I presume you wish to know my movements last night," he said, before Poirot could speak. "As I told you, I was in my room reviewing calculations. I heard nothing, saw nothing, and can prove nothing. Is there anything else?" "There is much else, monsieur." Poirot was unperturbed by the man's manner. "Your relationship with Marcus Ashworth, how long had you known him?" 3 years. We met at a conference on megalithic astronomy in Edinburgh. Our interests aligned. We began corresponding. And this correspondence, it was purely professional? Marsh's eyes flickered. What else would it be? That is what I am asking, monsieur. You traveled here from London specifically for the Equinox gathering. You brought cases of books and papers. This suggests more than casual scholarly interest. Marcus invited me to collaborate on a paper regarding the astronomical alignments of British stone circles. The Equinox provided an opportunity to gather observational data. Marsh's jaw tightened. That is all. And yet, Poirot said softly, "You recognized me immediately upon arrival. You knew my name, my profession, my lecture at the Royal Society. This suggests a man who pays close attention to matters of investigation." Marsh was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "Very well, Monsieur Poirot. I will tell you something I had intended to keep private." He leaned forward. 6 months ago, Marcus contacted me with a disturbing claim. He believed someone was systematically sabotaging his research, altering his notes, misfiling his documents, undermining his conclusions. He asked me to review his papers and determine whether his suspicions were justified. And were they? I found inconsistencies, small errors that seemed too precise to be accidental. Citations changed, calculations altered. Someone was indeed tampering with his work, but I could not determine who. Did you share this conclusion with Monsieur Ashworth? I told him his concerns were warranted. He seemed relieved, in a way, glad to know he was not imagining things. Marsh's expression darkened, and then the threatening notes began. He believed the sabotage and the threats were connected, that someone wanted not just to discredit his research, but to silence him entirely. Poirot absorbed this information in silence. Then, "Who had access to his research, monsieur?" "Miss Blackwood, primarily. She catalogued everything. Violet Ashworth occasionally entered the study to deliver correspondence or summon him to meals. The servants, I suppose, when cleaning." Marsh spread his hands. "It is not a small circle. And yourself? You had access during your visits?" Marsh's smile was thin. "I am a guest, Monsieur Poirot. My access was limited to what Marcus chose to share with me. If you are suggesting I sabotaged the research I came here to validate, I suggest you reconsider your logic." "Logic," Poirot murmured, "is precisely what I am employing. Thank you, Monsieur Marsh. You have been most illuminating." Lady Hartwell was the final interview of the morning. She entered the study in a flutter of anxiety, her handkerchief clutched like a talisman, her eyes red-rimmed from tears. Whether genuine or performative, I could not determine. "I simply cannot believe it," she kept repeating. "Poor Marcus, poor dear Marcus. Who could do such a thing?" "That is what I intend to discover, madame." Poirot gestured to the chair. "Please, make yourself comfortable. I have only a few questions." Lady Hartwell perched on the edge of the seat, her handkerchief twisting between her fingers. "Of course, anything to help, though I'm sure I don't know anything useful." "You mentioned last evening that you stopped in the drawing room for brandy before retiring. You said you saw no one. But I observed, madame, a hesitation in your reply. Perhaps there is something you omitted." Her face went pale. No. That is—" She stopped, pressing the handkerchief to her lips. "Madame Hartwell, a man is dead. Whatever you saw, whatever you are concealing, it may be of vital importance." "It's nothing to do with murder," she whispered. "I'm certain of it. It's just embarrassing." "Embarrassment is a small price for justice, madame." Lady Hartwell closed her eyes. When she opened them, her expression was resigned. "Very well. When I went to the drawing room for brandy, I saw Miss Blackwood and Dr. Price, together. They were speaking in low voices, standing very close. When they heard me enter, they separated immediately. Miss Blackwood left through the far door. Dr. Price pretended to be examining the books. She twisted the handkerchief tighter. I thought it was a romantic assignation. I didn't want to cause a scandal. Poirot's eyebrows rose. Miss Blackwood and Dr. Price, this is most interesting. It probably means nothing. People do speak privately, after all, but the way they jumped apart... Lady Hartwell shook her head. It looked like guilt, Monsieur Poirot. It looked very much like guilt. Chapter 5. The Torn Page. The morning had aged into early afternoon when a commotion in the entrance hall interrupted our deliberations. I heard raised voices, Fenton's measured tones attempting to impose order, and another voice, younger, more agitated, demanding to be admitted. Poirot and I emerged from the study to find Hugh Ashworth standing in the hall, rain dripping from his overcoat onto the marble floor. He was a man of perhaps 30, with the Ashworth features, the high forehead, the sharp nose, but softened by dissipation. His eyes were bloodshot, his collar askew, and his hands shook as he stripped off his gloves. "Where is my uncle?" he demanded. "I received the most alarming message at my hotel, something about the police." "Monsieur Ashworth." Poirot stepped forward, his voice calm. "I regret to inform you that your uncle is dead. He was found this morning at the Standing Stones." Hugh's face went slack. For a long moment he simply stared, his mouth working soundlessly. Then he staggered, and I moved quickly to steady him before he fell. "Dead?" The word emerged as a croak. "But that's impossible. I only spoke to him 3 days ago. He was perfectly—" He stopped, his eyes focusing on Poirot with sudden sharpness. "Who are you?" "I am Hercule Poirot. Your uncle engaged my services. He believed his life to be in danger." "And you failed to protect him." Hugh's voice hardened. "What use is a famous detective who cannot prevent a murder?" "I arrived only yesterday, monsieur. The danger was already in motion long before my involvement." Poirot's tone remained even. "But I intend to discover who is responsible, and for that I will require your assistance." Hugh ran a hand through his damp hair, visibly collecting himself. Yes, of course. Whatever you need." His gaze swept the hall, taking in the servants hovering at doorways, the closed doors of the library where the other guests had been asked to wait. "Aunt Violet, does she know?" "She was among those who discovered the body." "Good God." Hugh pressed his palm to his forehead. "This is a nightmare, an absolute nightmare." "Perhaps," Poirot suggested gently, "we might continue this conversation in the study. There is much to discuss." Hugh Ashworth sat in the same chair that had held so many suspects before him. His composure had returned somewhat, though his hands still trembled as he accepted the brandy Fenton had provided. "Your telegram," Poirot began, "indicated you were delayed in London on business. What was the nature of this business, monsieur?" Hugh's jaw tightened. "Financial matters. I was attempting to negotiate with certain creditors." "Your debts are considerable, I understand." "You understand correctly." Hugh's laugh was bitter. "I have no secrets on that score. The whole county knows I'm mortgaged to the hilt. But I loved my uncle, Monsieur Poirot, whatever you may have heard to the contrary. I would never have harmed him. And yet you are now his heir. Hollowmere Hall, the estate, the considerable fortune, all pass to you. Do they?" Hugh looked up sharply. "Has the will been read?" "Not yet, but as the sole surviving nephew." "I am not so certain of my position as you seem to believe." Hugh set down his glass with deliberate care. "Last month, my uncle summoned me here for what he called a serious conversation. He informed me that he was reconsidering his arrangements." "Reconsidering how?" "He didn't specify. He said only that he had been blind to certain truths, and that the future of Hollowmere required a different vision." Hugh's voice was hollow. "I assumed he meant to disinherit me, that he would leave everything to his precious stones, or to some antiquarian society, or to Miss Blackwood." Hugh's silence was answer enough. "You knew of his attachment to her?" "Everyone knew. Aunt Violet could speak of nothing else. She was convinced the woman was a fortune hunter, working her way into Uncle Marcus's affections." Hugh's lip curled. "I had no opinion on the matter. Celia Blackwood was nothing to me." Poirot leaned forward. "Monsieur Ashworth, I must ask you directly. Where were you on the night of your uncle's death?" "In London, at my hotel, the Clarendon. You may verify with the staff. The Clarendon is several hours from Moorbridge by train. It would be possible to travel here, commit murder, and return before morning." Hugh's face flushed. "It would be possible, yes, but I did not do so. I was in my room all night. He stopped, his expression shifting to something between shame and defiance. "I was not alone." "Ah?" "There was a woman, a companion. She remained with me until dawn. I did not wish to mention this for obvious reasons, but if it provides me an alibi—" "Her name, monsieur?" Hugh gave it reluctantly. Poirot noted it down without comment. "One more question, Monsieur Ashworth. Your uncle was writing you a letter. We found it on his desk, unfinished. It began, 'I have given considerable thought to our conversation of last month, and I find that I can no longer—'" "Do you know what he intended to say?" Hugh shook his head slowly. "I can only guess. Perhaps he meant to forgive me. Perhaps he meant to cast me off entirely." His voice cracked. "Now I shall never know." After Hugh's departure, Poirot sat in contemplative silence for several minutes. I did not disturb him. I had learned long ago that these periods of stillness were essential to his process. The little gray cells, as he termed them, required space to arrange the facts into patterns. At last he stirred. "Hastings, we must search this study more thoroughly. There is something here, something Ashworth wished to tell us but could not." "The unfinished letter?" "That is part of it, yes, but there is more." He rose and moved to the desk, his fingers tracing the scattered papers. Ashworth was a man of method, despite appearances. These papers, they look disordered, but observe. The research notes are grouped by site, the correspondence by date, the financial documents by type. Only one area is truly disturbed. He pointed to a stack of papers at the corner of the desk, their edges uneven, several sheets pulled halfway from the pile as if someone had rifled through them hastily. "Someone searched here, Hastings, and recently the dust pattern shows disturbance within the past day. The murderer? Perhaps, or someone seeking to conceal evidence." Poirot began examining the papers methodically, his nimble fingers sorting through letters, invoices, handwritten notes. Suddenly, he stopped. Voila! He held up a small leather notebook, its cover worn smooth by frequent handling. Several pages had been torn out, the ragged edges visible along the spine, but others remained, filled with Ashworth's distinctive handwriting. "A journal of some kind," I observed. "More than that, mon ami, a record of observations." Poirot turned the pages carefully. "See here, dates, times, notes on the household. V visited study while I was absent. papers disturbed. CB asked curious questions about the will. LP prescription seemed stronger than before, sleeping too heavily. He was watching them, I said slowly. Watching everyone. He was conducting his own investigation, Hastings. He knew someone in this house meant him harm, and he was attempting to identify the culprit. Poirot's expression was grave. But the crucial pages have been removed. Someone knew of this notebook and took steps to protect themselves. The murderer? Almost certainly. Poirot slipped the notebook into his pocket. We must discover what those missing pages contained, and for that we need... He stopped mid-sentence, his gaze fixed on the bookshelf behind the desk. Moving swiftly, he pulled out a large volume bound in dark leather. Fraser's The Golden Bough, the very work from which the threatening note had been torn. Miss Blackwood told us no pages were missing from this copy, I reminded him. Indeed she did. And yet... Poirot opened the book, rifling through its pages with practiced efficiency. Near the center, he paused. Hastings, look. The page was intact, the same illustration of robed figures and a stone altar that had appeared on the threatening note, but tucked behind it, nearly invisible against the binding, was a folded sheet of paper. Poirot withdrew it with the care of a surgeon. The paper was thin, expensive, and bore a typed message. The balance is broken. The old blood calls for the new. When the equinox comes, the reckoning follows. You have been warned. Another threatening note, I breathed, but this one was never delivered. Or it was delivered and returned. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Someone hid this here, Hastings. In the one place no one would think to look. The very book that was supposedly the source of the threats. But who? And why? Poirot did not answer immediately. He was examining the paper closely, holding it to the light from the window. The type is distinctive, he murmured. Not from a standard typewriter. The E is slightly elevated, the R tilted to the right. This machine has been damaged or deliberately altered. Is there a typewriter in the house? There is one in Miss Blackwood's office. She uses it for Ashworth's correspondence. Poirot folded the note carefully. We must examine it. But first, he turned back to the bookshelf, his fingers running along the spines with sudden urgency. One by one, he pulled out volumes, rifled through their pages, replaced them. I watched in bewildered silence as he worked his way methodically along the shelf. Then, with a soft exclamation, he stopped. The book in his hands was a slender volume on Celtic mythology. From between its pages, Poirot withdrew a document, several sheets folded together, bearing an official seal. What is it? I asked. Poirot unfolded the papers, his expression growing increasingly intent as he read. When he looked up, his face was transformed, the satisfaction of a hunter who has finally sighted his prey. It is, mon ami, the revised last will and testament of Marcus Ashworth. He held up the document. Dated 6 weeks ago, witnessed by Miss Celia Blackwood and Dr. Leonard Price. Good Lord, what does it say? Poirot's smile was thin. It says, Hastings, that Hugh Ashworth's fears were justified. He is not the primary beneficiary. The bulk of the estate, Hollowmere Hall, the land, the fortune, is left to someone else entirely. Miss Blackwood? No? Poirot's voice was soft. The estate is left to the village of Moorbridge, in trust for the preservation and study of the standing stones. A foundation is to be established in perpetuity. The stones are to be protected, researched, celebrated. Then who gains from his death? Ah, but that is the question, is it not? Poirot tucked the will into his pocket alongside the notebook. On the surface, no one. Hugh loses his inheritance. Miss Blackwood receives only a modest bequest for faithful service. Violet Ashworth is granted a life tenancy in the East Wing, nothing more. Then the motive cannot be financial. The obvious motive cannot be financial, Poirot corrected. But there are other motives, Hastings, older, darker ones, and I begin to see them now. He moved toward the door, his step quickened by purpose. Come, we must examine Miss Blackwood's typewriter, and then, I think, we must pay a visit to the standing stones once more. There is something I overlooked this morning, something that has been troubling the little gray cells. It is time to see it clearly. Chapter 6. The Little Gray Cells. The afternoon had grown darker, clouds massing over the moors like an army preparing for siege. The wind had risen again, carrying the scent of rain and something older, peat and stone, and the wild essence of the land itself. Miss Blackwood's office occupied a small room adjacent to the library, its walls lined with filing cabinets, and its single window overlooking the gray expanse of moorland. At the center sat a desk bearing papers, reference books, and, as Poirot had predicted, a black Remington typewriter. "Miss Blackwood," Poirot said as we entered, "I must examine your typewriter. You will permit this, I hope." She had been sorting documents when we arrived, her face pale but composed. At Poirot's words, her hands stilled upon the papers. "My typewriter? Whatever for?" "A matter of comparison." Poirot produced the typed threatening note from his pocket. "This was found hidden within Monsieur Ashworth's copy of the Golden Bough. I wish to determine whether it was produced on this machine." Miss Blackwood's gray eyes moved from the note to Poirot's face. "I see. You believe I wrote the threats." "I believe nothing as yet, mademoiselle. I merely gather evidence." She rose from her chair with deliberate calm. "Examine the machine as you wish. I have nothing to hide." Poirot seated himself before the typewriter, inserted a fresh sheet of paper, and typed a brief passage. I watched over his shoulder as the words appeared. "The balance is broken. The old blood calls for the new." He withdrew the paper and held it beside the threatening note. Even my untrained eye could see the difference immediately. The letters aligned cleanly on Poirot's sample. The E sat level, the R stood straight. "This is not the machine," Poirot murmured. "The type is different." "Of course it is." Miss Blackwood's voice held a note of vindication. "I told you, I had nothing to do with those threats." "And yet, mademoiselle, there is still the matter of your secret meeting with Dr. Price, the one Lady Hartwell witnessed in the drawing-room." The color drained from Miss Blackwood's face. She sank back into her chair, her composure finally cracking. "That was— It is not what you think." "Then tell me what it was." She was silent for a long moment, her fingers twisting in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Dr. Price came to me 6 weeks ago. He was concerned about Mr. Ashworth's health. He believed the sedative tonic he had been prescribing was affecting Marcus more strongly than it should, causing confusion, memory lapses, episodes of paranoia. And he suspected someone was tampering with the dosage, increasing it deliberately." Her eyes met Poirot's. "He asked me to watch, to observe who had access to Marcus's bedroom, to his medications. That is what we were discussing in the drawing room, our observations, our suspicions." Why did you not report this to the police or to Monsieur Ashworth himself? Because we had no proof, only suspicions, and Dr. Price was afraid. If the tampering was discovered, he might be blamed for prescribing a dangerous medication. His reputation, his practice. She spread her hands helplessly. We agreed to gather evidence quietly before making any accusations. And did you gather evidence? Nothing conclusive, but I noticed. She hesitated. I noticed that the sedative bottle was moved on certain nights, shifted slightly from its usual position on the nightstand, as if someone had handled it. Who had access to Monsieur Ashworth's bedroom? Everyone, potentially. The door was rarely locked during the day. Fenton entered to clean and lay fires. Violet brought him tea in the evenings. Dr. Price visited regularly for medical consultations. Even Hugh, when he was here, had access to the family quarters. Poirot absorbed this information, his expression unreadable. One more question, mademoiselle. The will that Monsieur Ashworth revised, you witnessed it, along with Dr. Price. Did you know its contents? No. Marcus sealed the document before we signed. He said only that he had made provisions for the future of Hollowmere. I assumed. She stopped. You assumed he had provided for you? Miss Blackwood's laugh was bitter. Violet Ashworth has made her suspicions clear to everyone in this household. She believes I seduced Marcus to secure my fortune. The truth is far less romantic. Her voice hardened. I respected Marcus Ashworth. I admired his work, his dedication, his vision. Whatever he chose to leave me, or not leave me, I would have accepted without complaint. And now? Now that you know you receive only a modest bequest for faithful service? She met his gaze squarely. Now, Monsieur Poirot, I grieve for a man I admired. The money means nothing to me. Poirot rose from the typewriter, his expression thoughtful. Thank you, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful. The path to the standing stones was treacherous in the gathering gloom. The clouds had thickened overhead, and the first drops of rain began to fall as we crested the rise and beheld the ancient circle. A constable from Moorbridge had arrived during our absence, and now stood guard at the perimeter, his young face pale beneath his helmet. The body had been removed to the house, but the altar stone still bore dark stains that the rain was slowly washing away. "What are we looking for?" I asked, pulling my coat tighter against the wind. Something I noticed this morning but did not properly understand. Poirot moved carefully around the circle, his sharp eyes examining the ground, the stones, the spaces between. "The boot prints, Hastings? I said they were fresh, made after the dew formed, but there was something else about them, something that troubled me." He stopped beside one of the smaller stones, kneeling despite the wet grass. "Here, you see?" I crouched beside him. The prints were still visible despite the rain, deep impressions in the soft earth, showing the distinctive heel pattern Poirot had noted earlier. "I see the prints. What of them?" "Count them, Hastings. Count the different sets." I examined the ground more carefully. There were indeed multiple sets of prints, the confused mass of footprints from the previous evening's ceremony, largely obliterated by newer impressions. But among these, I could distinguish two distinct patterns of fresh prints. "Two sets," I said slowly. "Two people came here after we retired." "Précisément." Poirot's voice was soft with satisfaction. "Two people, Hastings. One wearing heavy boots with a distinctive heel, a man's boots. the other wearing lighter footwear, shoes, perhaps, or ladies' boots with a lower heel. Ashworth and his murderer? Perhaps, or perhaps two murderers working together. Poirot rose, brushing grass from his knees. But there is more. Observe the direction of the prints. He traced a line from the edge of the circle toward the altar stone. The heavy boots approach from the path, the same route we took from the house. They stop at the altar, move around it, and then depart the same way. And the lighter prints? Poirot pointed in a different direction, toward the eastern edge of the circle, where the stones gave way to open moorland. They approach from there, not from the house, Hastings, from the moor itself. But there's nothing out there, just wilderness. Nothing visible, perhaps, but I asked Fenton about the geography of the estate. There is, I learned, a small cottage approximately half a mile to the east. It was once used by shepherds. Now it stands empty. Poirot's eyes gleamed, or so we are told. The rain was falling harder now, obscuring the distant landscape in curtains of gray. But through the murk, I could just make out a dark shape on the moorland, a low structure, barely visible against the heather. "We must search it," I said. "Indeed we must. But first—" Poirot moved to the altar stone, examining its surface with renewed attention. "There is something here I overlooked before. Help me, Hastings." Together, we studied the great flat stone where Ashworth's body had been found. The blood had mostly washed away now, but as Poirot ran his fingers along the edge, he stopped suddenly. "Here, feel this." I touched the spot he indicated. The stone was rough, weathered by millennia, but at this point I felt something different. A groove, too regular to be natural. I traced it with my fingertip. A straight line, then a curve, then another line. "Letters," I breathed. "Someone carved letters into the stone." "Not carved, Hastings, scratched, recently." Poirot produced a small magnifying glass from his pocket and examined the marks closely. 2 letters only, V, P. VP? What does that mean? I do not yet know, but these marks were made within the past few days. The scratches are fresh, not weathered. He straightened, his expression grim. Someone wished to leave a message, a signature perhaps, or an accusation. The shepherd's cottage was barely standing. Its roof sagged dangerously. Its windows were dark gaps in crumbling walls, and the door hung from a single rusted hinge. But as we approached, Poirot raised a hand for silence. "Someone has been here recently," he murmured. "See the footprints in the mud before the door? The same, lighter prints we found at the stones." We entered cautiously, the rain drumming on what remained of the roof. The interior was a single room, thick with dust and the smell of decay. A rough table stood against one wall. A broken chair lay in the corner, and on the table— "Mon Dieu," Poirot whispered. A typewriter. Old, battered, its keys worn smooth, but unmistakably present where no typewriter had any right to be. Poirot moved to the machine with swift purpose. He typed a brief phrase, examined the result, and held it up to me with triumph blazing in his eyes. The E elevated, the R tilted. This, Hastings, is the machine that produced the threatening notes. But who brought it here? Who would— The same person who approached the stones from this direction. The same person who left lighter footprints in the mud. Poirot began searching the cottage with renewed energy, pulling open drawers, examining shelves, rifling through the debris of years. In a corner, half hidden beneath a rotting blanket, he found a leather satchel. Within it were papers, dozens of them, covered in handwriting I had come to recognize. "The missing pages from Ashworth's notebook," Poirot said, "torn out and hidden here." I looked over his shoulder as he examined them. Entry after entry, recording observations, suspicions, fears. September 3rd. V. Again in study while I slept. Papers definitely disturbed. The Pemberton manuscript moved to wrong shelf. September 10th. Tonic tastes different tonight. Bitter. Must speak to LP about formula. September 14th. Caught V, emerging from my room at dawn. She claimed to be checking if I was awake. I pretended to believe her. September 17th. The truth becomes clear. V has been systematically sabotaging my research. Errors introduced, citations changed, conclusions undermined. She wants me to appear senile, incompetent. She wants control. V, I said slowly. Violet Ashworth. So it would appear. Poirot's voice was heavy. But wait, there is more. The final entry was dated the evening before Ashworth's death. Tonight I confronted V. She denied everything, of course, but I saw the fear in her eyes. She knows that I know. Tomorrow I will speak to Poirot, tell him everything. The will is secure. She cannot change it now. Hollowmere will be protected. But V is not working alone. Someone helps her, someone who provides the medical knowledge to tamper with my tonic, the access to my rooms. I have my suspicions, but I dare not write them here. Tomorrow, all will be revealed. Poirot folded the papers carefully, his expression grave. He knew, I said. He knew who was trying to destroy him. He knew Hastings, and he was killed before he could tell me. Poirot moved toward the door, his step quickened by purpose. But his notes have spoken from beyond the grave, the little gray cells. They have assembled the puzzle at last. Then you know who murdered him? Poirot paused in the doorway, the rain streaming past him into the gray afternoon. I know, mon ami. I have known, I think, since the moment I saw the body upon that altar. But knowing is not enough. We must prove. We must confront. We must bring the truth into the light where it can no longer hide. His eyes were hard as flint. Tonight, Hastings, we gather the suspects. Tonight, justice will be served. Chapter 7. The Revelation. The drawing room of Hollowmere Hall had been prepared for confrontation. A fire blazed in the great stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the assembled company. The rain had intensified outside, drumming against the windows with relentless fury, as if nature itself demanded resolution to the tragedy that had unfolded within these ancient walls. Poirot stood before the fireplace, his small figure commanding attention through sheer force of presence. His patent leather shoes gleamed in the firelight. His waxed mustache was immaculate. His egg-shaped head tilted slightly as he surveyed the faces before him. They were all present, every suspect, every witness, every player in this drama of death. Violet Ashworth occupied a straight-backed chair near the window, her gray face composed into rigid lines of dignity. Hugh Ashworth sat opposite, his leg jiggling with nervous energy, his bloodshot eyes darting between Poirot and his aunt. Sir Edmund and Lady Hartwell shared a settee, she clutching his arm with white-knuckled intensity, he attempting an air of bluff unconcern that fooled no one. Dr. Leonard Price stood by the bookcase, his medical bag, ever present, resting at his feet. His spectacles caught the firelight, obscuring his eyes. Miss Celia Blackwood had chosen a chair in the shadows, her intelligent gray gaze fixed upon Poirot with something like anticipation. and Oliver Marsh leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, his expression that of a scholar observing an interesting experiment. Constable Harding of the Moor Bridge Police hovered near the door, his young face pale with the weight of responsibility. He had arrived that afternoon with news that the roads were clearing, that Inspector Crawford would reach Hollowmere by morning. But Poirot had insisted that the matter could not wait. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed room, "we are gathered here to unveil a truth that has lain hidden beneath layers of deception, resentment, and long-nursed grievance. The murder of Marcus Ashworth was not a crime of impulse. It was the culmination of a careful, calculated plan, a plan that began months ago and reached its terrible conclusion upon the altar stone at the autumn equinox." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle upon the company. "When I arrived at Hollowmere, Monsieur Ashworth told me of threatening notes, of objects moved, of a sense of being watched. His family dismissed these concerns as the fancies of an aging mind. But Marcus Ashworth was not fanciful. He was a scholar, meticulous, observant, precise. He knew that someone within this household wished him harm, and he was correct." "We know all this," Violet Ashworth interrupted, her voice sharp. "What we do not know is who killed my brother. That is what you are here to tell us, is it not?" "Patience, mademoiselle. The truth must be approached with care, like a wild creature that will flee if startled." Poirot's gaze swept the room. "Let us begin with what we know. Marcus Ashworth was found dead upon the altar stone at dawn on September the 21st, the autumn equinox. He had been poisoned, and his body arranged in a grotesque parody of ancient sacrifice. A ceremonial cup was clutched in his hand, dark residue staining his lips. The obvious conclusion was that someone had lured him to the stones and poisoned him through the ceremonial wine. The obvious suspect was his nephew, Hugh Ashworth, a young man with considerable debts and expectations of inheritance. Hugh started forward. "Now, see here." "Peace, monsieur. I said the obvious suspect, but Hercule Poirot does not accept the obvious. The little gray cells, they demand more rigorous examination." Poirot moved slowly around the room, his hands clasped behind his back. "Hugh Ashworth has an alibi for the night in question, one that I have verified. He was in London, at his hotel, in the company of a young woman whose testimony is unimpeachable. He could not have committed this crime." Hugh slumped back in his chair, relief flooding his dissipated features. "Furthermore," Poirot continued, "the revised will, which I discovered hidden among Monsieur Ashworth's papers, reveals that Hugh was no longer the primary beneficiary. The estate was to be left to the village of Moorbridge, in trust for the preservation of the standing stones. Hugh's motive, it evaporates." "Then who?" Sir Edmund demanded. "If not the nephew, who stands to gain?" "Ah, but that is the wrong question, Sir Edmund. The question is not who gains from Marcus Ashworth's death. The question is who feared what he was about to reveal." Poirot stopped before the fireplace, his reflection dancing in the mirror above the mantel. Marcus Ashworth was conducting his own investigation. He kept a notebook, a record of observations, suspicions, evidence. I found this notebook in his study, but crucial pages had been torn out. Someone knew of its existence and sought to protect themselves. He produced the leather notebook from his pocket, holding it up for all to see. "I recovered the missing pages from an abandoned cottage on the moor. They tell a remarkable story. For months, someone had been systematically sabotaging Monsieur Ashworth's research, altering his notes, misfiling his documents, introducing errors that would discredit his work. Someone wished to make him appear senile, incompetent, unreliable. His gaze settled upon Violet Ashworth. She did not flinch. "The notebook names you, mademoiselle. Entry after entry describes your intrusions into his study, your handling of his papers, your presence in his bedroom at odd hours." "My brother was confused," Violet said coldly. "He imagined persecution where there was only concern. I visited his study to tidy. I checked on him at night because I worried for his health. There is nothing sinister in a sister's care. Perhaps not. But there is something sinister in the tampering with his medication." Dr. Price made a strangled sound. All eyes turned to him. "The sedative tonic you prescribed, Dr. Price. It was being altered. The dosage increased. The formula changed. Monsieur Ashworth noted that it tasted bitter, that it made him sleep too heavily, that he experienced confusion and memory lapses." Poirot's voice hardened. "These are not the effects of a properly administered sedative. These are the symptoms of deliberate poisoning." I had nothing to do with that." Price's face had gone gray. "I prescribed a standard formulation. If someone tampered with it—" "Someone did, doctor, and you knew. You suspected it, at least. That is why you approached Miss Blackwood, why the two of you were observed in secret conversation. You feared that your patient was being slowly poisoned, and you feared that you would be blamed." Miss Blackwood spoke for the first time. "That is true. Dr. Price came to me with his concerns. We agreed to watch, to gather evidence, but we found nothing conclusive." "Nothing conclusive," Poirot repeated. "And yet the evidence was there, hidden in plain sight, as the truth so often is." He moved to the center of the room, his presence drawing all attention like a lodestone. "Let me tell you what happened on the night Marcus Ashworth died. He had confronted his sister that evening, accused her of sabotaging his work, of trying to undermine his sanity. She denied it, but he knew the truth. He intended to tell me everything the following morning. He had secured his new will. He had documented her actions. He was prepared to expose her completely." Violet's face was ashen, but she remained silent. That night, after the household retired, Marcus Ashworth returned to the Standing Stones. Why? Because he had received a message. A note slipped beneath his door, asking him to come to the Stones at midnight for a final reckoning. He believed, perhaps, that his tormentor was ready to confess, or perhaps he simply wished to face them in the place he loved most. He went alone, but he was not alone for long. Someone followed him, someone wearing heavy boots, approaching from the house, and someone else came from the opposite direction, from the abandoned cottage on the moor, wearing lighter shoes. "Two people," I interjected. "We found two sets of fresh footprints." "Precisely, Hastings. Two people were present at the murder. The question is, who were they?" Poirot turned slowly, his gaze moving from face to face. The boots were distinctive, heavy, with a particular heel pattern. I asked Fenton to examine the footwear of everyone. In this household, only one pair matched. He stopped before Oliver Marsh. "Your boots, Monsieur Marsh, they were caked with mud from the moor, mud that matches the soil at the Standing Stones." Marsh's expression flickered, but he did not speak. "You were at the Stones that night. You followed Marcus Ashworth from the house. Why?" Marsh was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, He uncrossed his arms. Because I suspected what was happening. Marcus had confided in me, told me of the sabotage, the threats, his fears. I was worried for him. When I heard someone moving in the corridor that night, I followed. And what did you see? I saw Marcus at the altar stone. He was alone when I arrived, standing before the great stone, looking up at the moon. I called to him, but before I could reach him, Marsh's voice faltered. Someone else was already there, in the shadows, behind one of the standing stones. I saw movement, heard voices. Then Marcus collapsed. You saw who was with him? It was dark. The moon had gone behind clouds. I saw only a figure, slight, moving quickly. By the time I reached Marcus, they had fled. He was already dead, the cup in his hand, foam upon his lips. And you said nothing of this. You concealed your presence at the scene of a murder? Marsh's face contorted with anguish. What could I say? I had been found at the scene. I would be the obvious suspect. And I had seen nothing useful, nothing that would identify the killer. I panicked. I arranged his body, God forgive me, to make it look like the ritual sacrifice he had studied. I thought it would be a fitting memorial, a tribute to his work. You staged the scene, Poirot said quietly. The arms extended, the body centered upon the altar. That was your doing. Yes. And the wound to his chest? The superficial cut? Marsh nodded miserably. I found a knife among his possessions, a ceremonial blade he used in his research. I made the cut after death, to complete the tableau. I know how it sounds. I know it was madness. But in the moment it seemed right. The room was utterly silent. Lady Hartwell had pressed her handkerchief to her mouth. Sir Edmund's face was crimson with shock. Dr. Price gripped the edge of the bookcase as if he might fall without its support. Poirot regarded Marsh with something approaching sympathy. You are guilty of obstruction, Monsieur Marsh, of tampering with evidence, but you are not guilty of murder. The figure you saw in the shadows, the one who fled before you could reach the altar, that is our killer. But who? Hugh demanded. Who was it? Poirot turned to face the company once more. His expression had grown cold, implacable, the face of justice preparing to strike. The footprints from the cottage told me much. Lighter shoes, a woman's shoes, approaching from the moor, not from the house. Someone who knew of the abandoned cottage, who had used it to hide the typewriter that produced the threatening notes. Someone who could come and go without being observed by the household. His gaze settled upon Violet Ashworth. You sabotaged your brother's research, mademoiselle. You crept into his study, altered his papers, undermined his work. You wished to make him appear incompetent so that you could take control of the estate, or at least ensure that his foolish plans for the standing stones would never be realized. Violet rose from her chair, her face blazing with sudden fury. Yes, I altered his papers. For 40 years I gave my life to this house, to this family, while Marcus pursued his ridiculous obsessions. Standing stones, ancient rituals. He cared more for those dead rocks than for the living sister who devoted herself to his comfort. Her voice cracked. And then he told me that he was leaving everything to the village, that I would be permitted to live in the East Wing as a guest in the home I had made, as a charity case. So you sought to discredit him, to prove him unfit to manage his own affairs. I wanted him to need me, to see that without me, everything would fall apart. Violet's composure shattered entirely, tears streaming down her lined face. But I did not kill him. I would never, No, mademoiselle, you did not kill him. Poirot's voice was soft, almost gentle, but his next words fell like hammer blows. You did not kill him, because someone else did it for you. Someone who shared your resentment, who had their own reasons to wish Marcus Ashworth silenced. Someone who tampered with his medication, who typed the threatening notes, who lured him to the stones on the night of the equinox. He turned slowly, deliberately. Someone who approached the murder scene from the cottage on the moor. Someone whose lighter footprints I found in the mud. Someone who scratched initials into the altar stone, not as a signature, but as an accusation. VP, meant to implicate Violet and Dr. Price, to point suspicion away from the true killer. His gaze came to rest upon Celia Blackwood. She sat perfectly still, her gray eyes fixed upon Poirot's face. She did not flinch. She did not protest. She simply waited. Miss Blackwood, you were devoted to Marcus Ashworth. Everyone says so. But devotion can curdle into something darker when it is not returned. You loved him, did you not? Not merely as an employer, but as a man. Still, she did not speak. He did not see it. He saw only your competence, your dedication to his work. He trusted you absolutely, trusted you to catalog his research, to witness his will, to guard his secrets. And when he changed that will, leaving you only a modest bequest for faithful service, Poirot paused. That must have been a bitter blow. You understand nothing. Miss Blackwood's voice was calm, almost conversational. I did not care about the money. No, you cared about something far more important. You cared about being seen, about being valued, about being loved. Miss Blackwood closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, something had changed in their depths, a coldness, a hardness that had been hidden behind the mask of the efficient secretary. Marcus was brilliant, she said quietly, but he was also blind, blind to the sister who resented him, blind to the nephew who despised him, blind to the woman who would have given everything, everything, for one word of true affection. So you decided that if you could not have his love, you would have his legacy, not his money, his work, the research he devoted his life to, the standing stones. Miss Blackwood smiled, a thin, mirthless expression. He was going to destroy it all, that idiotic plan to turn Hollowmere over to the village, to let committees and tourists and bureaucrats trample through his life's work. I begged him to reconsider. I showed him what it would mean, but he wouldn't listen. He never listened. So you killed him. I set him free. Her voice rose slightly. I gave him the death he deserved, a ritual death, a meaningful death, upon the stones he loved, and I arranged it so that his research would continue, properly managed, properly protected, with me as its guardian. But the will can be contested, Violet's sabotage can be proven, the village trust can be dissolved for cause. In the chaos that follows, someone must step forward to protect Marcus's legacy, someone who understands it, someone he trusted, someone who murdered him. Miss Blackwood's composure cracked at last. He was going to expose me, his ridiculous notebook. I knew he suspected, but I didn't know how much he had written down. That night, when he confronted Violet, I realized he was putting the pieces together. I had to act. I had to... She stopped, her face twisting with sudden anguish. I loved him, and he never even saw me. And now... Her voice broke. Now he never will. Constable Harding moved forward, his handcuffs ready. Miss Celia Blackwood, I am arresting you for the murder of Marcus Ashworth. You do not have to say anything, but anything you do say." She rose with dignity, her hands extended for the cuffs. "I have said enough, Constable. More than enough." As she was led from the room, she paused before Poirot. Her gray eyes met his green ones, and something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, of two minds that understood the darker depths of human nature. "You knew," she whispered, "from the beginning?" "I suspected, mademoiselle. The little gray cells, they observed what others missed, the way you looked at him, the way your voice softened when you spoke his name. Love and murder, they walk hand in hand more often than the world admits." She nodded once, then allowed herself to be led away into the rain-swept night. Later, when the household had dispersed and the fire had burned low, Poirot and I sat alone in the library. The storm had passed, and pale moonlight filtered through the windows, illuminating the spines of books that Marcus Ashworth would never read again. "A tragic affair," I said quietly. "All murder is tragic, Hastings. But this one—" Poirot shook his head slowly. "This one carries a particular weight of sorrow. 3 people conspired against Marcus Ashworth, each for their own reasons. Violet, who wished to control him. Dr. Price, who allowed his medications to be tampered with through negligence rather than malice. And Celia Blackwood, who loved him so desperately that she could not bear to see his work diminished. Price will face charges? For negligence, perhaps. He suspected the tampering and did nothing effective to prevent it. That is not murder, but it is a failure of duty that contributed to Ashworth's vulnerability." Poirot sighed. "Violet, too, must answer for her sabotage. Whether the courts will punish her, I cannot say. But she will live with the knowledge of what her resentment helped create. And the standing stones? The will? That, mon ami, is for the lawyers to determine. But I believe Marcus Ashworth's vision will ultimately prevail. The stones have stood for 3,000 years. They will endure a few more legal battles." I gazed out at the moonlit moor, where the ancient circle waited in eternal patience. "Do you believe in such things, Poirot? The equinox, the balance between light and dark, the old rituals?" Poirot was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft with uncharacteristic introspection. "I believe, Hastings, in the darkness that dwells within the human heart. I believe that love, when twisted, becomes the most dangerous force in the world. And I believe that justice, however imperfect, is the only balance we mortals can achieve." He rose, adjusting his immaculate waistcoat. "Come, the night is late, and tomorrow we return to London. The little gray cells require rest. Even they cannot solve the mysteries of human nature indefinitely." As we climbed the stairs to our rooms, I glanced back at the library one final time. The fire had died to embers, but the books still stood sentinel in the darkness, silent witnesses to a tragedy that had unfolded over 40 years of resentment, 6 months of plotting, and one terrible night when the autumn equinox balanced between light and darkness, and in the end, darkness had won. Thus concludes the Autumn Equinox Mystery. We hope you have enjoyed this journey into shadows and secrets where love proves deadlier than hate and the truth hides in plain sight. Until next time, dear listeners, may your own mysteries resolve more gently, and may the little gray cells guide you always toward the light. Good night.